Yuri Lyedin, a Russian cinematographer and naturalist, lives in Norilsk, a city in Soviet Siberia. But it is rare to find him here. Usually, Lyedin spends his time in the more remote and desolate corners of the Russian north, studying and photographing the animals of the Soviet Arctic. His companion is a polar bear cub that had been kept for the winter in the protection of a zoo. Now, Lyedin prepares to return it to its home in the Siberian wilderness. Lyedin has made over a dozen expeditions to the extreme north of the Soviet Union. Often, his wife and daughter join him. Isolated for months in rugged conditions, they face hardship and sometimes even danger. In 1980, the Lyedin family undertook their most arduous and isolated expedition yet, to Wrangel Island, one of the most populated polar bear denning areas in the world. The award-winning films made by this unusual Russian family are popular on Soviet television and bring to the Russian people, and now for the first time to an American audience, a rare look at the wildlife in the vast expanse that is the Soviet Arctic. In the extreme north of our hemisphere is the polar region, a deep ice-covered ocean surrounded by the land of North America and Eurasia. The Arctic Circle delineates this area of the globe where the sun never sets on the day of the summer solstice and never shines on the winter solstice. Almost half of the Arctic landmass lies within the boundaries of the Soviet Union. In this land of contrasts, the winter is long, dark, and frigid, with temperatures often as low as 50 degrees below zero. Here there is less precipitation than in most of the great deserts of the world, and often a racing wind. No more than a handful of animal species can survive the harshness of this Arctic environment. But during the brief summer, the sky swings from perpetual night to perpetual day. And as this time-lapse photography shows, the sun circles low on the horizon. The temperature climbs above freezing, and the snow and ice cover begins to melt. And with 24 hours of constant sunlight, the Arctic explodes into life at a dizzying pace. For the brief months of summer, the land is transformed into a green carpet of tundra, undulating plains of mosses, lichens, and shrubs, and the Arctic blooms with the colors and fragrances of hundreds and hundreds of flowering plants. It is this brief abundance that lures the migratory wildlife that returns to the Arctic each summer. 300 miles beyond the Arctic Circle is an unusually rich repository of wildlife. Wrangel Island is north of the Bering Strait in the Chukchi Sea. The island, 85 miles off the coast of Siberia and 320 miles from Alaska, is one of the largest islands of eastern Siberia. In the spring, the impenetrable pack ice that surrounds Wrangel Island begins to break up and recedes north. And then the island becomes more accessible to animals and to man. Yuri Lyedin's 15th expedition took him to Wrangel Island in time to record the coming of summer.
I had hoped that by traveling to Wrangel Island to observe the animals and birds, I would learn more about the interrelationships between man and nature.
Lyedin set up camp at the base of the Dremhead Mountains near the northwest coast of the island. His wife and daughter were to join him after school was out. It was March, the time when the sun returns to the Arctic and the polar bears, coaxed by the warming air and the increasing light, begin to leave the dens that have sheltered them during the harsh winter months. For polar bear cubs, early spring is a time for tentative exploration of their new bright world. To strengthen their muscles and improve their coordination, they roam and play on the steep slopes of the mountain, while their mother is still recuperating from her long hibernation. On the day that Yuri arrived on the island, he filmed this orphan cub that found his mother still and cold. Without her to supply him with milk or shelter, he is vulnerable and helpless. And so Yuri became a nursemaid for the cub and for his brother. His supplies did not include a proper bottle, but he improvised as best he could. It is thought that pregnant polar bears come from hundreds of miles away, here to the Drumhead Mountains of Wrangel Island, to make their winter dens and birth their young. They travel over the ice floes and ice bridges on the Bering and Chukchi seas to make their dens on land. For a bear that trusts her den to the vagaries of the shifting ice may find herself hundreds of miles from her home when she leaves her den after the winter hibernation. Male bears and non-breeding female bears usually do not den or hibernate. They are the only animals that make their permanent residence on the surface of the frozen polar seas. They follow the ice, making their homes on the craggy floes that are buffeted and broken by the wind and sea currents. They hunt from ice shields, which provide easy access to ringed seal and walrus. The polar bear is perfectly adapted to life in the frozen north. He is a strong swimmer who spends most of his life in the water, insulated from the cold by thick, greasy fur and a dense layer of body fat. Like many animals of the Arctic, the polar bear is larger than its southern relatives, and the added bulk helps it retain heat. This bear has been here at the Drumhead Mountains since the previous autumn, when she picked this site for her den. It is likely to be close to her own birthplace, in an area where bears have been denning for generations. After she found a site close to the shore, she first dug a long tunnel and then a chamber. Sometimes a bear will extend the den to include 2 or more chambers. Three days after Yuri found the orphaned cubs, less than 2 weeks after they left the protection of their den, they returned to explore it. Like the igloos of the Eskimos, the entrance to the den is built at an incline, with the exit lower than the chamber to trap the warm air in the den cavity. Since snow is an excellent insulator, the dens stay as much as 40 degrees warmer than the outside air. Here in the late autumn, their mother entered hibernation, a 6-month winter sleep of depressed respiration and slightly lowered body temperature. The cubs were born in January, halfway through this hibernation. At birth, they weighed less than 1 pound. They were completely dependent on their mother, snuggling into her deep pile fur to stay warm and suckling her fat-rich milk about 6 times a day. For most of the hibernation, the mother reclines on her back and cradles the cubs with her massive paws. By the time spring approaches, the cubs have grown to 20 pounds. For the typical litter of 2, that means that without food for 6 months, a female bear has sustained herself and 40 pounds of new life off the layer of blubber under her skin. When these cubs are full-grown bears, they will have increased their weight 50-fold, and they will be among the largest predators in the world. A male bear, twice as big as a female, stands 10 feet tall and weighs as much as 1,200 pounds. He can eat 100 pounds at a time and run faster than the fastest man. Although today the polar bear roams on Wrangel and throughout the Arctic in relative safety, it was not always so. Yuri Lieden has spent years filming the polar bear. He compares the hunting traditions of the Eskimos with the ways of the commercial hunters who followed.
Из 59 поселенцев на острове 50 были эскимосы.
The Eskimos preserved the customs of their ancestors and would, for 5 days after killing a bear, plead with its spirit to put on meat and return. A wild superstition that hardly contributed to productive hunting, but it contained a wisdom that modern man does not heed, that the abundance of life is not infinite.
Eskimo settlements began on Wrangel Island in the 1920s. Like others in the Arctic, Wrangel Island Eskimos hunted the polar bears for their fur and blubber. They tracked seals, walrus, and Arctic foxes for their hides and meat, and each year awaited the return of the snow geese for the plentiful eggs and the good food they provided. The Eskimos were primarily subsistence hunters, but by the early 1900s, the commercial hunters of Europe, North America, and Russia had begun a massive exploitation of Arctic animal populations. The pelt of a fully grown polar bear could command a price of thousands of dollars, and by the middle of this century, the world polar bear population was being decimated. International concern for Arctic wildlife prompted legislation to restrict the hunting of endangered northern animals. In 1956, the USSR prohibited all hunting of polar bears within its borders. Within 2 decades, other nations with polar bears also began to limit hunting. By the early 1970s, strong expressions of concern by the Soviet scientific and academic community motivated the government to expand its protection of wildlife habitats. Today, over 120 nature preserves have been established throughout the country. And Wrangel Island, managed by Globochota, which is considered an environmentally progressive state administration, is now home to one of the largest preserves in the Soviet Union. As the sign says, nature in the Arctic is unique, protect it. In the nature preserve, the old settlements of the European and Eskimo hunters have been deserted. The traps are rusted and decaying. Only a few small Eskimo villages remain on the island, and hunting is limited to subsistence and local use. On Wrangel Island, as well as throughout the Arctic, the polar bear is now protected. The population that had dwindled to a few dozen bears is now back up to 200, and Wrangel is once again one of the world's most populated denning areas. It is April 19th, and the temperature hovers around zero. Almost 3 weeks have passed since Yuri Liedin arrived on Wrangel. The orphaned cubs have become camp followers. Eventually, Liedin will send them off to the safety of a zoo, since they would not survive the coming winter without the protection and care of an adult female. The other cubs are beginning to leave the security of the maternity area with their mothers. Soon they will make their way back to their real home, to the pack ice on the polar seas. Although the ground is still covered with snow, summer is approaching. Now it is time for Liedin to travel to the Tundra Valley to await the return of one of Wrangel's most numerous inhabitants, the Siberian snow geese. The spring days are growing longer, and soon the snow geese will return from their wintering grounds in North America. From 3,000 miles away they come, back to the land of their ancestors, back here to their only remaining refuge in all of Russia. These long migrations play a role in the Arctic ecosystem. The most sensitive stage of the tundra growth is early spring, before the migratory geese and other birds return. If the timing is right, the tundra will be ready to support a new generation of birds during a 2-month period of intensive feeding and growth after they hatch. But the summer is late this year, and though it is almost June, the ground is still covered with a blanket of snow. The temperature, which usually hovers around 33 degrees Fahrenheit, is still well below freezing. Once on Wrangel, the goose chooses a spot to begin building her nest. There's not much time, for the first eggs will usually be laid within about 4 days of arriving here. Another family arrives. These yearlings still wear the gray plumage from the previous summer. Although they are still too young to breed, they are now independent from their parents and will soon leave the nesting area to join other non-breeding birds that feed at the edges of the colonies. Wrangel Island, far from the many predators of the Arctic mainland, has over the centuries become a favored retreat of the snow goose. Here there are no wolves or brown bears, and the polar bear rarely roams the interior of the island. As more and more goose families arrive, competition for the snow-free ground increases. The crowded conditions force them into close contact with their most dangerous predator on Wrangel Island, the Arctic fox, that boldly patrols the nesting site. Flocks of geese break into small groups, and the pairs take up occupancy on the first available spot. Latecomers must make do with whatever space is still left. Most geese build their nest and lay their eggs with an amazing degree of synchronization, but someone has to be first. The fox keeps watch on the eggs, waiting for an unguarded moment. The gander, protector of the nest site, is busy driving away this would-be interloper, who cannot find a snow-free site for her own nest. The gander succeeds, but the victory is short-lived. For in the confusion, a fox takes an egg from the nest. And buries it in the snow. He won't eat it now, but saves it as a cache for later consumption. As the days progress and late arriving geese find no bare land for their egg laying, some geese resort to what is called nest parasitism, laying their eggs in the nests of others. Here, the gander attempts to drive away the invading goose as she tries to lay her egg in this nest. The goose and the gander peck and prod the newcomer to force her to retreat. In such an overpopulated nesting ground, conflicts such as these are common. Here the pairs must make do with much less territory than they would in more favorable conditions, and their clutches, nests of eggs, are likely to be smaller than in less crowded years. Although the snow is now melted, some geese had finally given up and just laid their eggs in the open, snowy tundra, away from the protection and warmth a nest provides. This egg dumping in harsh seasons destroys hundreds of eggs. Attempts by the geese to roll these abandoned eggs into an existing nest prove worse than futile. In such a full nest, none will be successfully incubated, and all the eggs will be destroyed. These are rusty geese. Their faces have been stained by the iron oxide in the soil of the American Northwest, where they grubbed for food in the tidal marshes during their winters there. Snow goose pairs bond while at their winter feeding grounds. The bonds are strong and last for a lifetime. A snow goose will only take a new partner if its mate dies. A gander adopts the nesting territory of his goose. When they return to their summer grounds, the male follows the female to her natal home. The goose returns to the same place where snow geese have been nesting for centuries, to a spot nearby last year's nest. By now, territories have been claimed and nests have been built. Each day an egg will be laid until there are 4 to 6. The goose will add to the nest, building it up around the eggs with heaps of grasses from the tundra. She covers the clutch carefully with moss to insulate it from the cold. Each day, the goose will leave her eggs camouflaged under a blanket of vegetation. When the final egg is laid, she lines the nest with down she picks from her breast. And then she settles in for the long incubation as the heat from her body warms the eggs and begins the process of development. Now almost nothing will make her abandon the nest. It is the 15th of June. The sun now shines for 24 hours a day. These geese have been incubating the eggs for a week. The temperature is usually just above freezing. It should be too late in the year for a storm, yet a blizzard is beginning to rage. The geese sit close and tight on the nest to seal the eggs from the biting cold so that the incubation will continue. Their down feathers, one of nature's best insulators, keep the geese from freezing. For 3 days and 3 nights, the geese are lashed by fierce gales and snow. They sit and wait, and the ganders wait at their side. The storm is finally over. and the snow that has melted swells the river that passes by the nesting ground. The birds preen and clean after the welcome return of the summer warmth. Seagulls and Jaegers circle the nesting grounds. The gulls have survived the winter here by feeding off the carrion left over from the foraging of the bear and the Arctic fox. And the Jaegers have returned from their migration in the south. They hover at the edge of the geese colonies, waiting for a chance at the nutritious goose eggs. In spite of the efforts of the ganders, more than 10% of the eggs will be lost to predators before they have a chance to hatch. It is the 23rd day of incubation. Today the eggs will begin hatching with great synchronization. Within hours, the tundra will be covered with tens of thousands of goslings. Here in the Tundra-Vaya Valley, the largest goose colony on Wrangel Island, thousands of goose pairs wait for the moment when the eggs will hatch. But even when it is so close to the final hours of incubation, the ganders must still be on guard, for the gulls and the foxes still surround them and their clutches of eggs. The fox keeps close watch, awaiting a moment when the gander's defenses are down. A sudden attack. The goose is tricked out of its nest, and Yuri Liedin watches as the fox stealthily takes and hides the egg.
Пришло время и нашим краснолицам.
The foxes steal more eggs than they can possibly eat. They hide the eggs and store them for later to help them survive in the lean months of the winter.
The dens of the Arctic fox are often nearby the nesting ground. These dens have been used for generations. The cubs are born in early June. When there's an adequate food supply, the Arctic fox can give birth to more than 10 cubs, twice as many as the North American red and gray fox. For 2 weeks after they are born, the female will not leave the den, for the voracious cubs suckle frequently throughout the day. During this period, she relies on the male fox to bring her food. As Yuri Liedin has witnessed, Arctic foxes are the #1 enemy of nesting birds on the treeless tundra.
Чего теперь не найдешь?
The foxes have inhabited the nesting grounds of the geese for thousands and thousands of years, and this has aided the natural selection of geese. If a goose is healthy, it is usually safe from the fox, but a weak or exhausted bird may fall prey to its traps.
By midsummer, the cubs will be weaned, and after a few more months within the family group, they are ready for their independence. These cubs will travel as loners. The foxes are uniquely equipped to withstand the extreme cold of the Arctic winter. They are one of the few mammals that wander the Arctic through all seasons. Their thick coat protects them in the 50-degree below zero temperatures. They are bigger than the red and gray fox, and their size and body density allow them to dissipate heat more slowly. And like most Arctic mammals, their extremities are shorter than those of their southern relatives to protect them from the harshness of the climate. Today, the goslings begin their struggle out of their shells. With an egg tooth, a protuberance on the top of its bill, it taps persistently at the egg to crack the shell. 24 hours later, with a great heave, a tiny bird is free. In fair weather, the goslings leave the warm protection of their nest as soon as they are dry, usually within 6 hours of hatching. The goslings dry to a yellow ball with a halo of golden down. There is the serious business of growing up to attend to, and they feed for 90% of the day, grubbing on grasses, flowers, and sedges. This is a rapid growth period, the 40 to 50 days when the goslings develop and prepare for their first flight. The parents go through a molt at the same time as they temporarily lose their flight feathers. Together, the family begins a long earthbound journey. They will travel as far as 20 miles, the fledglings struggling to keep up with their stronger parents. They are leaving the nesting grounds at the foothills of the mountains in the north of the island and are walking to the low-lying Academy Tundra to reach its rich pastures and its lakes and streams. More and more geese leave to join the exodus in a waddling procession. The Tundravaya Valley is almost empty now. Only a few families remain. Their clutches have not yet hatched. The Aiden's daughter Veronica waits and watches. She is wondering if these goose families will be able to make their journey safely.
The geese have, over the centuries, adjusted themselves to harsh natural conditions, but they haven't been able to adjust to man and the advent of hunting. People had believed that the abundance of birds and their eggs would last forever, but it was not so. And now the snow goose no longer exists on the Soviet continent, and this is the last place that they can make their nests.
Although snow geese nest throughout Canada and the Northwest Territories, the geese that nest here are considered a subpopulation of that more plentiful group. For these Siberian geese, Wrangel is their last refuge in all of the Soviet Union. 150,000 geese used to make their way every year to nest on the island. But by the early 1970s, their numbers were down to 45,000. In the Soviet Union and the United States, scientists were concerned by this serious decrease in population. In a cooperative effort that grew out of the 1972 landmark Environmental Protection Agreement between the USA and the USSR, scientists began a program to try to figure out why the goose population on Wrangel was declining so much faster than other snow goose populations. In the summer of 1975, American scientists visited Wrangel Island to join Soviet scientists in a banding program. They captured snow geese nesting there and attached a new kind of tag. The orange bands around the birds' necks were designed with an international coding system that could be read throughout snow goose territories in North America and the Soviet Union. The large tags, which do not harm the birds, can be seen with a telescope from as far as a quarter of a mile away. After banding, the birds are released and they return to their flock. As the geese continue on their migratory path, the large bands enable scientists, bird watchers, and naturalists to track them. Almost 80% of the birds banded in this program have been resighted in their North American wintering grounds, a remarkable success rate. These reports of sightings have helped scientists to identify the migration patterns of the Wrangel Island geese. They found that 1/3 of the Wrangel snow geese traveled to British Columbia and Washington State and wintered there on the tidal marshlands. The rest of the geese traveled even farther south to feed off the grain stubble in California's Sacramento Valley. The scientists discovered that the Siberian geese arrived in U.S. hunting territory before the more plentiful snow geese that nest in the Canadian Arctic. Consequently, the Wrangel Island geese were being killed in disproportionate numbers by enthusiastic hunters at the opening of hunting season. In 1979, the U.S. agreed to delay hunting until the Siberian geese were joined by the later arriving Canadian Arctic populations. As a result, today, back on Wrangel Island, the snow goose population has more than doubled. The last goslings of the season have finally hatched, but the geese must still wait several hours before they can depart with their broods. Separated from the flock, these families are at greater risk from the foxes who still patrol the grounds. The geese will do anything they can to defend their young. This threatening posture and honking discourages the fox, who prefers to stay away from the bill and the broad and powerful wingspan of the gander. This time, the goose succeeded in protecting the goslings. And now they too will begin their long journey to the Academy Tundra to rejoin the bigger flock. "20 miles away from the snow goose nesting grounds, there is a noisy bird colony. In the winter, only the raven makes its home on the island. But with the return of the warmth of summer, 43 species come to Wrangel, and 37 of these bird species make their nests here. These are black-legged kittiwakes. They spend the winter feeding on the fishes of the Bering Sea. In the summer, they migrate to the coasts of Siberia and the Pacific Northwest to nest in the safety of the ragged cliffs. And the pelagic cormorants take refuge here too. building their nests in the hanging rocks by the sea. The cormorant sits on a narrow ledge, pressing its chest to the surface of the cliff. It can flex its long neck far back, keeping balance with its protruding tail. Each nest usually contains about 3 downy nestlings. The adults stay close by, flying out to sea only to scavenge for shrimp and tiny fish. The kittiwakes are members of the gull family. In the summer, there are tens of thousands of them on Wrangel Island. The adults skim the surface of the sea, feeding off the plentiful fish. The snow geese have arrived here at the Academy Tundra, close to the bird colony. Their long walk is over, and soon they will be ready for flight. The molting stage of the adult birds is finished, and the fledglings are just about ready to take to the air. Even though the fledglings are now stronger and better able to protect themselves from the fox, the danger is always present. The number of young have been greatly reduced over the weeks of their journey here. This small flock, which left the nesting ground with about 40 fledglings, now has only 9 with them. It is late July, and at 37 degrees Fahrenheit, the air is warm. But it will soon be time for the snow geese to start their long sweep south ahead of the Arctic winter. The snow geese usually fly in irregular, jagged lines. Sometimes, however, they will fly in this V formation, riding on the waves of air created by the lead goose. This adult kittiwake returned to her nest to find a strange fledgling, which she prods and pushes away. This other unwelcome fledgling also came looking for food from an adult. Here, too, the Arctic foxes live on the edges of the colonies, where they can find a variety of birds for their diet. In a land where less than a handful of animals brave the winter cold, the Arctic fox is ubiquitous. No place is too remote or too harsh for the fox. It travels fearlessly from the steepest mountain crags to the ragged ice floes. Mobility is the key to the fox's survival, for the fox ranges wherever there is an adequate food supply. In the summer, when the birds, lemmings, and Arctic rodents provide abundant nourishment, the fox thrives. It will store some of its booty in the crevices of the cliffs or beneath the snow or earth as a cache, saved for the leaner months of winter. In recording life on Wrangel, Yuri Lieden has often witnessed this intense competition for survival.
The laws of nature may sometimes seem cruel. The weak are defenseless and have little chance, and only the strongest will survive.
Now it is late summer. In warm years, by August, the temperature has been above freezing for 2 months. The ice that surrounds Wrangel for most of the year has thawed and broken. receding far north beyond the island. When the ice recedes, the island becomes, for a brief time, accessible to the walrus herds that have been summering in the Chukchi Sea. The walruses spend the winter 1,000 miles away in the Bering Sea. Since they are air-breathing mammals, they could not survive in the Chukchi when the ice cover is thick and unbroken. But every summer, they journey here to rest in the midnight sun and to feed off the abundant mollusks on the sea floor. This cow uses her front flipper and tusks to heave her bulk onto the slippery ice. The walrus is one of the world's largest marine mammals. A cow can weigh up to 1,500 pounds, yet she's less than half the size of the huge bulls. And although this 4-month-old calf is only a fraction of the weight of the adult animals, without tusks, the job is much more difficult for him. The calf was born in the spring on the ice floes of the Bering Sea. The bond between a walrus calf and its mother is strong and unbreakable. The cow will protect her calf at all costs. At the first sign of danger, she will sweep her calf off the ice floes and dive with it to the safety of the sea. For the first months of its life, the calf suckles frequently and sleeps and travels on the back of the cow. Walruses are among the most gregarious animals in the world. They travel in large herds, sometimes led by an older, dominant bull. When they haul out to rest, they stay close together. In the winter, this social behavior helps them to retain heat, and when the temperature drops, they huddle in crowds. The thick hide and blubber coat that help them survive the severe cold of the winter sometimes keeps them too warm in the 36-degree Fahrenheit weather of August. Then, they stretch out and lounge on the ice and in the water to cool off. The walruses dive as deep as 200 feet to grub food from the seabed and stay submerged for 5 to 10 minutes. Their Latin name means tooth-walking seahorse because they use their tusks like sled runners as they glide along the bottom. With its muzzle and whiskers, the walrus roots and feels for food. Bulls will eat as much as 100 pounds a day, 800 soft-shell clams, or 10,000 of the smaller hard-shell clams. In spite of the strong ties among the walruses, there is still a prominent and sometimes hostile hierarchy. When a bull is annoyed, he may strike out with his 3-foot tusks, puncturing the 1.5-inch thick skin of the animal that got in his way. Notice the calf's wound from an earlier fray. Because of their small size, the calves are often inadvertently hurt and occasionally killed by the bulls. And there are other dangers to the calves. Adult polar bears are fierce hunters with a strong sense of smell. When the walruses congregate on the west coast of Wrangel at Cape Blossom, the bears arrive to hunt them. The bears charge the walrus herds. In the ensuing panic, sometimes calves are separated from their mothers and become easy prey. With the bears come the foxes, who follow in their trail, hoping to feed off the walrus carrion that the bears leave behind. The bears usually attack only calves. Walrus bulls are strong competitors, sometimes twice the weight of the bear. And when a fight occurs in the water, walruses have been known to kill bears with their massive tusks and strong flippers. The foxes move in when the bear is finished eating. As long as there is food available, the foxes will stay here, eating their fill. But in the lean winter months, they must take to the pack ice to follow in the trails of the polar bear. feeding off the scraps of food the bears drop. But it is not these natural predators that threaten the walrus population. By the middle of this century, commercial exploitation of the walrus for its precious ivory tusks had reduced their numbers by almost 80%. But today, international hunting regulations have enabled the Pacific walrus to return to a population of 270,000, their highest in decades. This year, more than 35,000 walruses, over 10% of the entire Pacific population, have hauled out here at Cape Blossom. Although the animals on Wrangel Island spend their time in the nature preserve in relative safety, a preserve is not enough protection for migratory wildlife. As they travel from sea to sea and over the pack ice, these Arctic animals pay no heed to national borders and sovereignty. Luckily, human concern for the protection of wildlife also crosses geographic and political boundaries. International legislation protects the polar bear, walrus, and snow goose throughout their migratory path. And the 1972 U.S.-USSR Environmental Protection Agreement mandates close collaboration in tracking the progress of the protective laws.
Наделенным разумом.
We have long been taught that everything in nature is interconnected, and we must never, never forget that we are only a part of the natural world.
The summer is drawing to a close on Wrangel. The snow geese are beginning their 3-month migration to their wintering grounds in the south. The days grow shorter, and soon the Arctic night will return. There is a new chill in the air that heralds the approach of winter. The walruses are ready for the grand exodus, back through the Bering Strait to the warmer waters of the Bering Sea. The polar bear and Arctic fox, now fat from the summer's plenty, will soon return to roam the pack ice on the Arctic Ocean. And before the Arctic night descends on Wrangel Island, Yuri Lieden, too, must journey home.